Hello, my global family. Welcome to another episode of the Global Yaadie podcast. I am your host, Dana Lynn. Thanks for tuning in. If you're listening for the first time, welcome. And if you've been here before, we are so glad to have you. Now, as the Caribbean faces increasing threats from hurricanes and other extreme events, effective communication is important now more than ever. And today we're joined by a communication specialist as we'll be diving into the impact or the critical role that communication plays in keeping communities informed, prepared, and more resilient in the face of climate change and these detrimental impacts. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome another communication specialist, another island girl in the room, Khrystal Walcott. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. So I have to have the quick plug. Not every day I get to speak to a fellow communication specialist within this capacity. And of course, I have to make the quick Karamak plug, seeing that you are also a fellow integrated marketing communication specialist student or graduate, as we would say. Right.
Yes, please. I completed my degree in 2020, and it really was a tremendous experience coming to Jamaica and learning about your culture, your creativity. That definitely impacted me positively.
So being from Barbados, way out in the Eastern Caribbean, was there like a culture shock coming into Jamaica, when you just started? What was that like?
Yes, Jamaica's huge. So Barbados is a very small island. So coming there, it was like, okay, this is a big place. The language, I know people say they cannot understand Barbadians, but sometimes we can't understand you, to be honest. Yeah, so that it took me a while to kind of figure out what you were saying.
Yeah.
Certain terms like hush, hush for us means shut up,
Shut
hush
up.
for y'all means sorry. So
Yeah.
things like that I definitely had to adapt to, but it was a really, really great experience.
Yeah, I've been to Barbados before as well, so I know people now I understand the annoyance of people who are from Barbados or other countries who say, listen, when I'm traveling Jamaica, it seems like I'm taking forever to get where I need to go. And and I had the experience of maybe touring like 10 out of 11 parishes
Mhm.
in Barbados. And within the same time it takes me to get from Kingston, which is a capital city in Jamaica, to Saint Elizabeth, which is a parish where I'm from. So I was stunned by that. We totally understand. All
Yeah.
right. So Crystal, both of us we're still in the hurricane season and Hurricane Beryl, while maybe more like 7 8 weeks behind us has still wreaked a lot of havoc in the Caribbean. Barbados also was impacted. I know a lot of persons were talking about the fisheries complex or other communities. What was the experience like for you, either from what you saw, being at home, or observed for other parts of the Caribbean?
Okay, so for me, it would have been the second hurricane that I experienced because we
Mm,
would have had Hurricane Elsa in 2021. Yeah, the years lose me sometimes. It was scary, even though we weren't directly impacted by Beryl being over us. It was
yes.
a lot to actually hear your house sounding a little shaky. You seeing the trees outside moving, all those different things. Actually, experiencing a hurricane is a lot, but having to work in the space is a lot more because I'm seeing how our brothers and sisters were impacted in Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, specifically the Grenadine Islands, and is an interesting space to be in because it all happens so quickly. So one minute you are preparing, you see the rush to the supermarket, the rush to the gas station, and then you see how people's lives and livelihoods are changed drastically. So our fishery sector was definitely hit hard, and they are still within the recovery process. Not sure how long that will take, but it just goes to show the importance of preparing and then obviously doing the best you can to ensure that your family, your property is secured. From the response aspect as a communicator, it has been quite a bit, and we are now winding down that side of it into early recovery.
Yeah, so I'm gonna dive into that. So even you mentioned, working in this space and the preparedness element. And so we can't leave communication out of the conversation or any process that deals with disaster risk management. So for our audience, can you share with us, how important is it for us to look at to factor in communication when it comes to preparedness for natural disasters or, environment risk overall?
Yeah, for sure. So, as I said, we live in a hazard prone region, one of the most hazard prone regions in the world. So, we face the threats of hurricanes, droughts, flooding, earthquakes, and even volcanic eruptions. And then there is climate change, which is causing all of these disasters to be more frequent and intense. So, it's crucial for us to understand what that means and how we can actually be ready. And as communicators, that is our role, and it plays an important role in preparing our audiences for any impact, whether it is that we are telling farmers, hey, this is how you can protect your livestock during a drought, or this is how persons within flood prone communities can evacuate before a hurricane. Effective communication essentially saves lives and livelihoods, and it's not just preparedness, it's about how we can kind of break down the complex terms that seem so out of reach. So when I first started in this space, I was hearing terms like comprehensive disaster management. And I'm like, okay, what's this? Then I
Yeah.
became acquainted with a lot of acronyms, and it quickly became my role to then simplify that for our audiences. So now when I hear comprehensive disaster management, I'm able to say, okay, this is a whole of society approach from households to schools to the disaster offices, how we are able to then take action collectively to be prepared.
Yes, I love that. And so you mentioned several audience types a while ago in communicating. And so what does it look like for effective communication? Because you notice one of the first things you mentioned at the start when we're prepared. And I mentioned it in another podcast interview, as well as it's something we always see. The
Mhm.
minute we hear about an extreme event or hurricane, the first thing we're doing is going to the supermarket. I mean, we don't need to be told that, but are there other and so aside from the supermarket shopping, we know some of the standard tips that are normally shared with us. But I found that this time around, this experience also offered, based on how people were affected, it showed that okay, we were prepared in some ways, but not in other ways. And so when you think about the Caribbean, a vast melting pot, you have different countries, Barbados, Jamaica, all of that. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada. What would you say are some effective ways or strategies that we can communicate with different audiences?
Okay, so when it comes to communications, the first thing we really need to understand is what goals we are trying to achieve. Is it
Mm,
a case where we are trying to raise awareness? Are we trying to inspire people to take action? And this then helps to guide the strategies that we employ. So if you are looking to raise awareness, it's easy to set up TV interviews, public service announcements, you could have radio segments, you could do call-in programs, outdoor ads, because this allows you to
yeah,
reach your audience on a greater level, and social media, of course. But when it comes to changing a behavior,
yeah,
especially in the Caribbean,
yeah.
media engagement alone really isn't enough. We have to be able to build real interpersonal connections with people and have face to face conversations, because we as a people connect better through conversation and who the conversation is being had with, where the messages are coming from. That's what I
Mm,
would have found. So our preparedness levels aren't always where they should be,
yeah,
unfortunately, but we definitely have to employ more hands on strategies like sensitization sessions, public meetings. We could have ambassadors, we have influencers now coming on board to represent the message. And even because it is behavior change, we could look at rewards and recognition. So, how do we recognize people making actual efforts to be early in their preparedness action? So, definitely it depends on what you are trying to achieve. And another thing for me, as we mentioned, Jamaica, I've always loved your ability, European Jamaicans, to be creative with how you bring about certain messages. So I feel like anything could become a dance, anything could become a jingle. And that actually helps with the retention of the message and actually helps people to be more inspired to take action.
Yeah, I laugh. Well, I laugh because now I'm imagining yes to that.
Mhm.
Doesn't always fit, but then it made me think about some of
Yeah,
those stories I read growing up when people used to do rain dances to make the rain come. So now we're gonna have to figure out another dance, to make the hurricane go away or not even, come our way. So our dancers, they have our work, they have their work cut out for them. But so definitely, I think we understand clearly the awareness, and as you mentioned about it, that there are so many ways to be creative and strategic for awareness, but how does communication fit into resilience building? How does it fit into that?
so, what we need to do is understand how we could actually build resilience within the communities. So, for example, having a conversation with the same fishermen that would have been impacted by the hurricane, we get to understand their reality. And then we know, we being a disaster office, we being the government, how we can take their actual lived experiences to create mechanisms for them to be stronger going forward. So the
Yeah.
next hurricane season, they really shouldn't be having the same challenges that they would have had in the last one if
Yes.
they would have communicated any challenges, because resilience is about how we can take lived experiences and move forward for the Caribbean in a better way.
Love, absolutely love that. So people might be looking at you, if it is that they're gonna be watching this on YouTube, or if they're gonna see the episode flyer artwork, and I'm like, this is a young girl. What she know about communications? What does she know about communications? Just to translate. But you've been around. I mean, I know you've had experience working during La Soufriere. That's a volcanic eruption. That was St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Yeah, 2021.
Yes, the earthquake in Haiti and the flooding in Guyana, and most recently burial. And I'm just throwing I don't remember the year. You can maybe, I don't know if I need to timestamp the year, but I'm just giving, that those are distinct or different examples of natural disasters. And so I'm curious to know what insights from these experiences would you have gained that you can share with us, that, helps to better guide communication approaches or response to disaster, because certainly that's a very rounded experience that you've had so far.
Yeah. If anybody asks me about these experiences, I would say this is the hardest that I have ever had to work.
Right.
Um, so as it is right now, I give visibility to two projects at the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. And this allowed me to support communications in these disaster times that you would have mentioned. Let me mention the year, because we had La Choufeur in 2021. We
Mm-hmm.
also had the earthquake in Haiti in 2021. There was severe flooding in Guyana and Suriname. It's not 2021, 2022, but this just goes to show how close the impacts really are. And I remember in May 2021, after I would have done work on La Soufriere, we had almost a million accounts that we would have reached during that specific period. And I
Mm-hmm.
was done, because it's like, okay, here I am putting out information to this amount of people, and it has to be valuable.
Yes.
Yeah. So the first thing I learned is that people are always searching for information quickly, but this could be a challenge because you have to make sure that the information is accurate. So a few days before the explosive eruption of La Soufriere, this was in April, persons were circulating images with this volcano full of lava, and people were saying, well, this is La Soufriere. If you remember correctly, there was severe ash flow, not just in St. Vincent, but
But
in
other
Barbados as well.
yes.
Yeah, it was crazy. So that definitely was a different volcano. So this just speaks to the fact that there is a lot of misinformation out there. So I had to learn to decipher what is true versus what isn't, and double check everything across the platforms before I put it out there, because the way that social media works, you really can't take it back. And when people are searching for information at these specific times, I found it of help to give value to them. So, for example, during last affair again, I feel like this was like such a distinct period for me. I would have focused on research and sharing tips on how you could clean up ash around your home, how you could clean up your car, how persons with respiratory illnesses like myself could
Mhm.
cope during that specific time. And it was really cool to see people actually sharing the information and using it. It's important to also be sensitive about how we communicate, especially in disaster times, because these are people's lives and everything has completely changed for them. So I find it better to highlight how we are responding to an impact, rather than focusing on damage. For Hurricane Beryl, which would have been in July, we showcased the teams that were on the ground working, but we also thanked them publicly for their service because appreciation also really matters. But
Yeah.
one of the biggest things for sure that I learned coming out of Hurricane Beryl is how to communicate the needs of countries effectively when you have thousands of people trying to send relief supplies at the same time. So each country would have a priority list of needs based on their initial damage assessment, but cash tends to be preferred. So for Hurricane Beryl, I made sure to emphasize the importance of cash donations. I would have posted the needs list as I was guided, but included a disclaimer about the fact that supplies should be addressed to XYZ just to ensure that they reach the intended audience. Because when you think about it, once there's an influx of relief supplies, who's going to coordinate them? Who's going to manage? Where are they going to be? So that requires personnel on the ground to assist. So those are some of the things that I would have learned alongside not being too wrapped up in the damage and loss because it can actually affect you. Seeing all these images, seeing your brothers and sisters literally impacted by a hazard event.
So how can you manage that, as you said? Um uh I was just listening to, because I know sometimes some people are showing, oh, look at the devastation, everybody's trying to get one more sensational pick after the other out there. And so for you, if it's not your reality, if yes, you're from Jamaica but your family's not from that parish, or yes, you're from Barbados, or but you're not being impacted, how, I don't know, is there any, I'm not saying you can stop people from what they put out, but from an organizational standpoint, as you rightly said, because we have to show what has happened, but then you said, we have to be mindful, just the same. How can we strike that balance?
I think is about a touch of humanity, if that
Mm,
makes sense. Sometimes you have to put yourself in another person's shoes, and I wouldn't want it to be my country blasted all over the news, just focusing on who might have died, what impact there might have been. So there's that, but what are you actually trying to communicate by only showing the damage associated with a hurricane? Why aren't you looking to show what is being done and how communities are coming together to support each other? Why aren't you showing how Caribbean islands, because we tend to rally around each other, and I
yeah,
think it's amazing to see. Why won't you show that against damage and loss? So I think there's a lot more consideration that definitely needs to go into how we communicate when it comes to hazard impact.
agreed. So my other question, the role of community-based organizations,
Mm,
and in assisting the disaster risk reduction or recovery process, and from a communication standpoint as well. What role does community feedback? I think you alluded to it. When you mentioned about taking from the lived experience, from persons who've been impacted, but what other role can community feedback play in shaping these strategies? Just stretching your brain a little bit, asking it differently.
no, that's no problem. When it comes to feedback, is important because you have to understand who you are communicating to. You're not going to know if the strategy is effective if there is absolutely no form of feedback. So on us being communicators, we definitely have to get out there and engage directly with people. So we have a campaign running online. We have an ad. Okay, great. But is it actually reaching the people that we want it to? So here in Barbados, we would have seen an uptake in like school tours. and they're focused on health and climate change. What if we take it upon ourselves to go into these schools and actually share the messages? And it's not just sharing the messages. What if we ask the children, well, hey, how did your parents prepare for Hurricane Beryl? And then they give us a little insight, and we start to understand how, at the household level, people are preparing for disaster impact. In addition to schools, you could go into the communities and talk to residents about any challenges that they may be facing in preparing for a disaster and explain why it's important to take early action. So I know our older folks would definitely appreciate that kind of one-on-one conversation. And it will help us to understand if there are any challenges that they're facing, would it be health that they won't be able to move to action, is it a case where their socioeconomic situation doesn't allow them to actually prepare in the way that we want to? By getting an understanding of what the context is within the communities, and we could also ask them how our strategies are working for them, if they are working, then we are able to employ greater strategies going forward using the feedback that we would have received by having that meaningful connection.
I love that, and I keep on smiling like a proud mom, as if.
Like a problem mom.
I don't know. It's like, how proud, because I don't know what to say. Proud what? But but I'm smiling because this is a perfect response in highlighting how communication strategies, especially strategies in relation to development communication or disaster risk, you can't build strategies in boardrooms only or behind the desk. You're going into the communities, and you're getting, so the solutions that you're applying are being informed from the people who you're serving, and so I think that's really a solid approach, um, that we often need to consider, because sometimes it's all about grouping and brainstorming, and while we are brainstorming with these things in mind, we're not doing it in real time or taking an active approach of linking back. So um, I really like that
We
approach.
said earlier and related to like the fishermen, you're not gonna catch them unless you meet them where they are. It's
Absolutely.
important to meet people where they are if you actually want to achieve anything as it relates to resilience. So that level of community engagement, we are Caribbean people. We like to talk, we like to see each other. Then that will help us to understand, just to make sure that the information isn't going above anybody's heads as well. You don't want that, and see if they are facing any challenges to action.
Yes. So, so when it comes to natural disasters, or whether, in terms of an engagement or support standpoint, we
Mhm,
often consider how different groups are affected. And
mhm.
so even locally in Jamaica, I recall the agriculture minister, in some news reports talking about how, women have been really significantly impacted in this disaster. When you think about the female
Yeah,
single-headed households who are
yeah,
from the farming community. And
yeah.
so I wanted to also ask you, your perspectives on what role gender plays in a disaster, and the considerations when treating with gender in a disaster.
Yeah, so you're right to say that, because I think it's across the region that we have that matriarchal structure where mothers and children is the typical family unit that we would see. So the mother is the head of the household. What happens in cases of disaster? So I didn't realize until I actually started to work in this space how genders are affected differently by a hazard impact. So in doing my research, I would have found a study that the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, that we know as IFRC, would have done in 2015, speaking to gender based violence, also known as GBV, being an unseen and unheard aftermath of disasters. So looking at it, people are displaced. The protective services are also displaced because everything goes straight into response mode. There's that window for GBV to increase. It also occurs in emergency shelters. So now when we're looking at shelter management on the whole, that has to be prioritized. We have disruptions in access to basic necessities like clean water, toilets, and sanitary items. So that definitely impacts women and girls who are menstruating, pregnant women, and mothers caring for newborns. So luckily, we have organizations like SUDEMA, UN Women, UNICEF, and other regional and international agencies who incorporate gender responsiveness into recovery efforts. So we have to understand the needs of men, women, boys, and girls after disaster, raise awareness about GBV in emergency shelters, and this has been done through workshops over the years, setting up referral systems to assist survivors of GBV, and providing basic hygiene kits for women and girls with essential items that they would need during their cycle. Another thing that we definitely would need to work on resilience and recovery is SETS disaggregated data. So then that informs recovery programs going forward. So we know what health programs need to be implemented. We could keep track of who is supposed to be in school so that we don't have cases where young people are dropping out of school, and overall just to build resilience.
Interesting. So while you mentioned several of the organizations that would be incorporating, gender-based considerations, and they've been doing solid work, but the reality is that they may not necessarily be engaging with, they can't reach everywhere, everyone, every community. So if somebody is listening and they have an opportunity to be part of a community response, what can that look like for them? You
Okay.
know.
I would definitely say kind of landing on my charitable side, there are a lot of organizations out there dedicated to making a difference in the community. If it is that you want to volunteer, there is probably a Rotary Club in every parish in Jamaica. There's a Rotary Club everywhere. There are organizations that deal specifically with the developmental work for women and girls. So you could reach out. You could learn more about what their mandates are. You could be a part of any community outreach to share messages of how young women and girls are affected by disasters, because there needs to be the understanding, of course. And then you could be a part of asking for sponsorship to help build those same kits for them. So there's a lot that definitely could be done, but I would definitely say volunteering is the way to go, and that's how you could get more exposure to
Mm.
make an impact.
All right. So we're moving from one, I want to say vulnerability, but other groups, we touched on the gender element. And
Yes.
so we also have to be mindful of other vulnerabilities, and also like people with disabilities. They've often, they are championing, not to be overlooked, not to be forgotten, especially in times of disaster. I'll never forget um I'm trying to remember his name, Patrick Lafayette, who was also a podcast guest last season. But the
Mhm.
first time I heard him speak, so Patrick is a communication specialist, radio host as well, but he's visually impaired. Or should I say, and he's visually impaired. So, I remember he said that he was making a presentation and he said, listen, if there's an earthquake right now, everybody's running out the room and forgetting about me. So, I just wanted to pick your brain on this part too, with given the intensity and frequency of these events, vulnerable groups and populations are going to be worse affected. And so is there a way, how can we use communication as a tool, as an enabling environment to better support people with disabilities and other vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so reaching our vulnerable groups really is important. And even if you as a professional aren't sure how to do that, you could partner with people who do, and you could do research on your own just to make sure that your strategies align. When it comes to people with disabilities, I would say that even beyond the communications persons, but all staff and volunteers, as it relates to disaster offices or charitable groups within the space, you really should undergo a level of training to understand how to connect with persons with disabilities, understanding the diversities, how you can assist, any limitations and opportunities, of course, to include them in disaster planning, because we have to make sure that they are a part of any plans that we develop. We have representative bodies here in Barbados, like the Barbados Council for the Disabled, that could give more guidance as to what are the best ways to communicate with persons with disabilities. So in 2020, we were working on a documentary, and I was saying, well, hey, we should add some captions to the video. Not just because some people don't actually listen and they would read the text, but persons who are deaf could actually follow and get the message that we were trying to communicate. I would have had a training with BBC Media Action, I want to say 3 months ago. And we had an activity to develop a strategy for the homeless community after a tropical storm. And they are obviously directly impacted by anything that happens, but
Yes.
sometimes they are forgotten completely. So we talked about, again, involving the representative body, which would have been the Barbados Alliance to End Homelessness, because they're the ones working with them, helping them to survive, essentially, coordinating any feeding programs, any messages that need to get out to them. They're the ones that do that. And the community would then identify with them and trust them, similar to any churches or charities that host feeding programs. And we also discuss using outdoor media to share alerts, because we do have digital screens. So even though we may not understand fully, there is room for stakeholder and partnership engagements when it comes to developing these strategies. So you're not alone when it comes to ensuring that vulnerable groups are communicated with effectively.
You are not alone. That's right. So my biggest takeaway from your response as well is like collaboration and community is important. So even if you have the mind to consider a particular group,
Yeah.
there are bespoke or targeted organizations that you can pair with to ensure that whatever you're doing is more effective on the ground. And so I was kind of avoiding this question because I felt like it was cliche. And I'm like, maybe it wouldn't be this kind of interview if I didn't ask it. The role of technology and the evolution of like digital media and social media and how that can enhance the communication effort. Because I say that because though I'm always critical of
Mm,
how we use social media
mm,
because sometimes it's just one element of a process and not the end all be all. But I just want to hear your thoughts on it. Because I'm wondering if it's a natural. We're in a hurricane and your power goes or whatever, but and a lot of people are still glued to the phone. Nonetheless, it's not the same as it was a couple years ago.
mhm.
We're definitely more pervasive now. So, what are the thoughts? And I don't know if there are any, more innovative platforms or digital platforms that also help to enhance communication during natural disasters as well.
Okay, so digital technology has changed everything.
Yeah.
It definitely has changed the way that we communicate in this space. So we're not just relying on pamphlets, because I know people still have pamphlets, PSAs, newsletters, traditional media interviews. We now have these platforms that allow us to be more creative and share information quickly, which, as I mentioned before, in working during these events, that people want information.
Yes.
The topic could be a little heavy, and what I found is that people tend to pay more attention to the platforms before, during, and after an impact. But with the tools we have now, we can ensure that resources are readily available for when they are ready. To get the message. We also could get feedback pretty easy and engage with people in real time. So we have Instagram. We could create story highlights on earthquake preparedness, what to do during a flood, how do you prepare for a drought. You could have trivia competitions to kind of test people's knowledge and give out little prizes. You could host press conferences now online on Facebook and YouTube, capturing both the media and the public, so the information is immediately there. We have webinars, so many webinars now, where we connect stakeholders worldwide to discuss important topics like building back better, cultural resilience, and early warning systems. So it kind of makes the world really small. But for me, three things that kind of stand out a bit. So I don't know you're familiar with geospatial data. So we can now actually map out countries, we can map out their population, their resources, physical terrain, and infrastructure. And then when a disaster strikes, we can actually show how many roads were damaged, which ones, which communities were impacted. So then, as professionals, we have this innovative way to present information to our audiences. Funny enough, WhatsApp channels are pretty effective.
Of course,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so I was really locked into our Met Office's WhatsApp channel during Barrel, before and during Barrel. And I like it because we don't have to manage chatter or people sending random things in a group chat. It's actually just strategic and
Focus.
targeted communication. So I think that WhatsApp channels are pretty effective when it
Yeah,
comes to communicating, and it makes it a little easier on
yeah,
our end. And another thing that I like is the ability now to collaborate on international awareness days. So, for example, we have World Tsunami Day coming up, and we could have a Canva template on the website, and we pull that information. And each of us now has the ability to share one unified message across the globe. And I
yeah.
think that's really cool and really impactful to show just how technology has transformed the communication space. But not to say that other forms aren't effective. We still need to have a radio in the house so that we know
You don't have
what's
to do
going
it.
on. If the
Crystal,
power
because
goes
it's on
out,
the media. Nobody's judging you.
yeah, yeah. And we
Yeah,
still need those traditional forms,
yeah,
but the digital space for sure gives us a lot of room to be flexible with how
yeah.
we send out the messages.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think one thing I'm gonna be looking forward to is I'm hoping whether TikTok or whether radio, these tips on how we're gonna be building more robust, physical infrastructure.
Mhm,
Because I've watched even like my high school
mhm,
damaged once more from another major hurricane. So, in the middle of countries across the Caribbean, mobilizing funds to repair, we're going
mhm.
to have to think about how we're repairing, even though the
Yeah,
concern is now actually getting the funds to do it, but how we're repairing, because this won't be the first, this won't be the last hurricane. And so it makes no sense. And that's adding to people's psychological trauma. You lost your roof one year, you had it replaced, and now another hurricane comes along, you're
yeah.
worried if it's gonna happen to you again.
Yeah, I think too, we should show more of the recovery actions. So I can't remember where I
Yes.
was. A few years back, I think it was a conference 2022, and they were talking about, I think it was Dominica and their recovery after an impact. And I would have thought, okay, well, they're probably getting along pretty good. They were not. The society was changed drastically, and I think sometimes we only see the impact before, during, a bit after, but we don't actually see the recovery response. So as you were the recovery element, so as you were saying, you have a school that is damaged repeatedly. How could we show then the resilience in recovery, just to make sure that the story continues and we're able to make that human impact. But people don't realize how long recovery actually takes, how much it costs, and that definitely is something that we could work on as communicators.
Yeah, I was gonna say, sounds like you have your work cut out for you, but then I remember
You do.
on that, I'm also on that end. But thank you so much, Crystal. So many insightful responses and way of exploring. And I'm very happy that we're able to center the role of communications in natural disaster risk reduction, and as we build back better or build resilience for the region. And I really want to, thank you for the work that you're doing in this space. I hope that, I mean, the sky's the limit for you, but I hope that you stick and stay a while, because I know a lot of times it's so easy for young communicators or other persons. It's a commercial space, it's a marketing, it's the working for corporate brands and all of that. But this is very important work that we're
It's
doing.
never been that for me. I think when I did my internship in 2019, I
Yeah.
was like, this is my space. I feel
Yes.
like anybody that knows me knows that I love to volunteer, I love to give back. But you could actually do this through your work.
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt. Similar
Yeah,
experience. So I feel like we've walked a similar path. I mean, you're a
yeah.
rotary, I'm a rotary, so there's so many elements that I can relate. But thank you so much for doing this important work, and I wish you all the best,
You
especially as
too.
you continue. Thanks to support the recovery efforts, and engage your audiences, because I know you have a following as well on social media that you also share the importance of your work, and so I love to see that as well. All right.
Thank you.
So I want to thank everyone else for tuning in to another episode of the Global Yaadie platform podcast. the Global Yaadie podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're listening on our podcast listening platforms, also rate, leave a review so more people can find us. Don't keep this to yourself. And as usual, sharing is caring. So really appreciate it. Once more, take care.